December 25th, Christmas morning. The crisp winter air had a bite to it, but my front yard glowed warmly with the soft golden lights I had spent hours meticulously arranging. The tree, a grand fir I had brought home just the week before, stood proudly in the center of my lawn, adorned with colorful ornaments and twinkling lights that reflected off the freshly fallen snow. Everything looked perfect, almost like a scene from a holiday postcard. The smell of pine mingled with the aroma of fresh brewed tea inside, creating the perfect festive atmosphere. I sat comfortably on my chair by the window, a cup of tea warming my hands. I had only taken 2 sips when the sudden chime of the doorbell pierced the quiet morning. My first instinct was surprise, then unease. Visitors on Christmas morning were rare, usually family, occasionally a neighbor dropping by with cookies, but this felt different. There was a weight, a tension I couldn't place immediately. Setting my tea gently on the table, I walked toward the door, my heart beginning to beat faster. As I opened it, the sight before me froze me in my tracks. Standing there was the infamous HOA Karen, flanked by 2 uniformed security guards. She looked like someone who thrived on confrontation, someone who considered herself a lawmaker and enforcer all in one. Her thick-framed glasses sat low on her nose, accentuating the sharp, calculating look in her eyes. Her red coat was perfectly tailored, almost military-like in precision, and her black boots reflected the morning sunlight with a clinical sheen. In her hands, she clutched a clipboard so tightly it looked like it was an extension of her own authority. The sight alone could make anyone feel judged, scrutinized, as if she were stepping out of a courtroom instead of a suburban street. I swallowed hard, my stomach knotting. Christmas had always been a peaceful time for me, a time for warmth, joy, and celebration. Yet here was this woman, the embodiment of rigid rules and unbending authority, standing at my doorstep, ready to shatter that peace. I took a moment to compose myself. "Good morning," I started, forcing a smile. "What brings you here today?" My tone was polite, controlled, but there was an undercurrent of curiosity and caution. I tried to read her expression, hoping for a hint of holiday cheer, or at least normalcy. But her lips pressed into a tight line, the faintest smirk flickering, mocking almost as she ignored my greeting completely. Without preamble, she stated coldly, "Your Christmas decorations violate HOA rules. You are being fined." Her voice was flat, authoritative, leaving no room for discussion. The guards stood silently, their stoic faces betraying no emotion, but their presence amplified the gravity of the situation. It was as if they were silent witnesses to an inevitable punishment. I blinked, momentarily stunned. "Excuse me?" I asked, trying to maintain a calm voice despite the sudden spike of anger that threatened to boil over. "It's Christmas today. Are you seriously here to do this?" I gestured vaguely toward the lights and the tree, as if the display itself could speak in my defense. The morning sun reflected off the ornaments, scattering tiny rainbows across the snow-covered ground. Surely this sight was harmless. Surely the holiday spirit itself should outweigh any arbitrary rule. But Karen's smirk only grew, a self-satisfied curl that suggested she thrived on moments like this. "Rules apply every day," she said, her voice tinged with mockery. "Holidays are not exceptions. The lights on your house, the tree you brought outside, none of it complies with HOA decoration guidelines. You are required to pay a $10,000 fine." For a brief, suspended moment, the world seemed to tilt. $10,000 for Christmas decorations? My hands clenched slightly, my mind racing to process how absurd, how unjust this was. Yet amid the surge of anger, I recognized a calm clarity forming. This was not just about the fine, it was about principle, about standing up to power misused, about defending the simple joy of a holiday morning. I realized that shouting or reacting impulsively would only feed her sense of control. She was testing boundaries, not seeking reason. I needed information, facts, and a plan. I nodded subtly, forcing a measured calmness I did not entirely feel, and retreated inside, closing the door gently behind me. The sound of it clicking shut felt symbolic, a small barrier between me and the encroaching chaos. Inside, I let myself breathe, focusing on the rhythm of my heart.
I walked to my study, a space filled with the quiet assurance of law books, folders, and reference materials I had accumulated over the years. Pulling out the necessary files, I began to read, each page reinforcing what I already suspected. HOA rules, while binding in certain administrative aspects, did not override state or local law, and crucially, no HOA could legitimately prevent a homeowner from decorating their private property for holidays. The realization brought a small, almost imperceptible smile to my lips. Knowledge was power, and armed with the law, I had the upper hand, even if Karen didn't yet realize it. This confrontation was far from over. I paused, imagining my next move. The stakes were clear. Maintain composure, gather evidence, and respond decisively. Reacting with anger would only escalate the situation. Patience and strategy, that was the key. I made a mental note of every detail. The red coat, the black boots, the smug expression, the clipboard clutched like a weapon. All of it would be relevant. Finally, I returned to the doorway, files in hand. My expression neutral, my tone calm, I prepared to speak. This time, I would assert control, not with threats, but with knowledge and unshakable confidence. Stepping back onto the porch, I could feel the crisp winter air biting at my cheeks. The holiday lights reflected softly off the fresh snow, creating a warm golden halo around the tree and the neatly decorated front yard. Yet the beauty of it contrasted sharply with the confrontation standing just a few feet away. HOA Karen, with her clipboard in hand and guards flanking her like silent sentinels, radiated a chilling sense of authority. There was no Christmas cheer in her posture, no softness in her voice, only rigid enforcement of rules, as if the season itself held no meaning in her eyes. I cleared my throat. My tea still sat untouched on the small table by the window, a reminder of the peaceful morning I had lost. I took a deep breath and tried to reason with the situation. I understand rules exist, I said, slowly, carefully, but today is Christmas. Surely there must be room for some leniency, just for the holiday spirit. Karen's expression didn't change. If anything, her smirk deepened, revealing the satisfaction she took in moments like this. Rules are rules. The holiday does not exempt you from compliance. Every day, the same standards apply. Your decorations are in violation. You are required to pay a $10,000 fine immediately. I felt a tight knot form in my stomach. $10,000 for lights and a tree, for creating a festive atmosphere in my own yard. It seemed absurd, almost surreal, like some dark comedy unfolding on a snow-covered stage. My hands, which had been resting calmly at my sides, clenched slightly, but I forced myself to breathe. Anger would only feed her arrogance. Calmness was my weapon. I took a careful step back and tried another approach. Can you please specify exactly which rules are being violated? I've reviewed the HOA guidelines multiple times this year, and I can't seem to find any clause that prohibits standard Christmas decorations. Karen adjusted her glasses, giving me an exaggerated look of condescension. The guidelines are clear, she said, flipping open her clipboard as if the very papers contained divine authority. Lights must be minimal. Trees cannot exceed certain dimensions. Decorations must not be visible from the street. Your display clearly exceeds these limits. The fine has been calculated based on repeated violations.
I exhaled slowly, trying to keep my voice level. Repeated violations? This is the first year these decorations have been up. I gestured toward the tree, the twinkling lights, the neatly arranged ornaments, and the glowing garlands on the porch. Everything is in line with community standards as I've understood them. Her smirk didn't fade. Ignorance of the rules is not a defense. You are responsible for compliance. Payment is due immediately. I felt a surge of incredulity. Not only was this claim ridiculous, but the timing, Christmas morning, made it feel cruel, almost punitive. The warmth of the holiday had been replaced by tension, the soft glow of the lights overshadowed by a looming threat. Yet amid the frustration, I found a calm resolve forming. This was not just about decorations or money. It was about standing up to arbitrary authority. I paused and looked her squarely in the eye.
I will not be paying this fine. There is no legal basis for it. I intend to contest this formally." My voice was calm but firm, carrying the weight of conviction. I could see the momentary flicker of surprise in her eyes, quickly masked by practiced arrogance. The guards shifted slightly, but remained silent, their presence only emphasizing the power dynamic at play. I realized that confrontation alone would not suffice. I needed to prepare a strategy, armed with facts and legal references, to expose the overreach of authority. Without turning my back, I stepped inside again. The warmth of my home contrasted with the cold confrontation on the porch. I retrieved my files, legal references, and HOA documentation. Page after page, I scrutinized the rules, cross-referencing them with state and local laws. It became immediately apparent HOA rules, while binding in certain administrative contexts, cannot override statutory law. No provision granted them the authority to fine a homeowner for holiday decorations on private property. This knowledge brought a quiet satisfaction. The power dynamics had shifted in my mind. I was no longer the passive recipient of arbitrary enforcement. I was now fully aware of the limits of their authority and prepared to act accordingly. Returning to the porch, I felt the weight of decision pressing on me. I had to project composure, not confrontation. The first step was clear: assert my knowledge and document the interaction. Calmness, facts, and persistence would be my tools. "You may leave," I said finally, my voice steady, carrying an unspoken confidence. "I will be filing a formal complaint against this misuse of authority. Consider this your first and final warning." For a brief moment, Karen's smirk faltered. She adjusted her glasses, a subtle shift, almost imperceptible, but enough to hint at unease. Her stance remained rigid, but I could sense the tension, a crack in the armor she had worn so confidently. The guards exchanged a subtle glance, perhaps noticing the shift, though they did nothing. With a curt nod, Karen turned away, the crisp sound of her boots on the snow-covered porch marking her departure. I watched carefully as they walked back toward the street, my mind already running through the steps I would take next. Evidence needed to be documented, the complaint needed to be filed, and every interaction recorded meticulously. The morning sun reflected on the snow, casting long golden shadows across the yard. The lights on my tree twinkled gently, a soft reminder that the holiday had not been entirely ruined. I stepped back inside, closed the door carefully, and began the process of gathering evidence, documenting interactions, and drafting a formal complaint. This was no longer a minor disagreement. It was a test of authority, fairness, and justice. By the time I finished documenting the encounter, the warm glow of the lights inside the house offered a comforting contrast to the cold tension outside. The Christmas morning, once interrupted by an uninvited confrontation, had transformed into a moment of resolve. I was no longer merely defending decorations. I was defending principle, standing up against arbitrary power and ensuring that my voice, backed by law and reason, would be heard clearly. After the confrontation on the porch, I stepped inside my house, letting the door click shut behind me. The soft glow of Christmas lights reflected on the walls, but the warmth felt muted by the tension lingering in my chest. My heart was still racing, yet my mind had started to work, carefully, deliberately. This wasn't just about decorations or fines. It was about fairness, authority, and knowing when to stand your ground. I walked to my study, a small room lined with bookshelves filled with legal books, legal references, and carefully organized files. Every year I had kept notes on HOA regulations, local ordinances, and relevant legal precedents. Not because I expected a confrontation, but because knowledge is power, and preparation is always wise. Today, that preparation would prove invaluable. I sat down at my desk, flipping open the relevant files. Line by line, clause by clause, I examined the HOA guidelines. The rules were strict, yes, but there was nothing granting the HOA the authority to impose a fine on a homeowner for decorating their private property for the holidays. In fact, local and state laws explicitly protected homeowners in such situations. My anger slowly transformed into clarity. I could defend myself and my Christmas decorations with facts, reason, and documented evidence. I spent the next hour meticulously compiling notes. I wrote down every interaction, the date, time, the guard's presence, Karen's exact words, her smug attitude, and the way she tried to assert authority. I also photographed my decorations and the setup outside. This wasn't just preparation, it was building a shield of truth against overreach. I realized something important in that moment. Calmness, knowledge, and documentation were stronger than anger or retaliation. If I reacted impulsively, I would only give Karen the satisfaction of power over me. By staying composed, I kept control. Once I felt confident in my research, I went back to the living room and looked out at my decorated yard. The lights glimmered gently, the tree stood proudly, ornaments sparkling with the reflection of the early sun. Despite the intrusion, my home still radiated the warmth and joy of Christmas. That thought gave me a quiet satisfaction. The holiday wasn't ruined, not yet, and it wouldn't be if I handled this properly. Later that day, I drafted a formal complaint against HOA Karen, citing the misuse of authority and referencing the specific laws that protected my rights. I sent copies to the senior HOA board members and the city legal office. I also prepared a brief letter outlining the facts of the situation for any neighbors who might ask. Transparency, I reminded myself, was crucial. This was not about revenge, it was about accountability. Over the next few days, I reflected on the incident. Karen had acted without compassion, without reason, and without any understanding of the law. She had allowed rules to overshadow human decency, and the audacity of issuing a fine on Christmas morning only emphasized her lack of perspective. But I realized that anger would not solve the issue. Calm action, prepared and precise, would.
Finally, the day of the community meeting arrived. Neighbors gathered, curious and concerned, to witness the proceedings. HOA Karen arrived, wearing the same red coat, but her demeanor had shifted. There was no smugness, no sense of untouchable authority. She spoke softly, avoiding eye contact, and carried her clipboard loosely, as if it no longer gave her power. The contrast with her previous arrogance was stark. The senior authority addressed the room firmly. The fine was declared illegal. HOA Karen had overstepped her authority. My decorations were fully allowed, and she received a formal warning. One more incident, and she would be removed from her position. The room was silent, the air filled with a quiet sense of justice. As the meeting ended, Karen gathered her files without a word and walked away. My neighbors offered quiet congratulations, but I simply smiled, feeling the satisfaction of right action rather than triumph over a person. The Christmas lights still shone, the ornaments glimmered, and my home retained its festive spirit. The message of the story became clear to me, and I carry it with every action I take. Calmness, preparation, and knowledge are more powerful than anger. Rules are important, but humanity, fairness, and justice must always prevail. Stand up for your rights, but do so with dignity and evidence. This Christmas, the lesson wasn't about decorations. It was about courage, restraint, and holding firm to what is right, even when confronted by unreasonable authority. Wow, that was the incredible story of how I stood up to HOA Karen and defended my Christmas decorations. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more crazy HOA encounters, neighborhood dramas, or any other amazing stories, drop a comment below and let us know what you want to see next. Don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed it, and make sure to subscribe to our channel, HOA Story YT, so you never miss another thrilling story. Thanks for watching, and remember, stay calm, stand your ground, and always know your rights.